Please pray with me. May these words that I speak be grounded in my soul, encouraged by the God presence in me. And may these words that you hear be captured by your soul, enlivened by the God presence in you. Amen. I need to begin this morning by saying this. If you choose to understand Jesus as wholly divine and not human, then I suspect this reflection will mean very little today. The reason I say this is because a wholly divine Jesus, a Jesus who was not like us, would not be able to experience the real human condition, the frailty, the fear, the anxiety, and the uncertainty of life. It would mean, for me at least, that Jesus didn't really live like us or suffer like us, because as a God, he would be above all of that. It is why, for me, Jesus must be one of us, fully human. In saying this, I am not denying his divine nature, not at all. There is no doubt that the Spirit of God was in him in a big, big way. But not in a way that is different from how the Spirit of God is also in each and every one of us. After all, Jesus himself said that we would do even greater things than he did. The difference, it seems to me, is that Jesus lived more deeply and more completely into the Spirit of God that was within him. But he was a human being like us, born of an ordinary woman like us, a man who felt joy like us, and a man who felt pain and anxiety just like us. It is Jesus' humanity and not his divinity that causes me to get caught up by his courageous life, his strength of purpose, and his unwavering commitment to love. Oh, if I could only be half as brave, half as committed, half as trusting, half as vulnerable as this amazing man. It was his willingness to stand against the systems, political, economic, and religious systems that diminished people and that diminished the presence of God. It is admiration, not adoration, that I bring to the story of his final week of his human life. It is admiration of the power of a single human being to be willing to die for love, to be willing to die for God in the face of seeming insurmountable adversity. Jesus chose to go to Jerusalem at Passover, the time when the city would be filled with pilgrims, a time when the Roman forces would be doubled, perhaps even tripled, in order to keep the peace. This was a highly political move because Jesus was taking his message, his way of living, to the very heart of the system. Jesus was saying no to oppression, and yes to love, yes to God. Jesus was willing to face the shadow of his own culture, of his own community, not simply by being outwardly critical of it, but more radically by living and teaching a better way, the way of compassion. It is nearly impossible for us in our culture today to understand just how dangerous it was for Jesus to stand against the political and religious authorities in his time. Just how radical it was to claim love as the way to live. His dyadic culture was a system of honor and shame. Every rule, every law, every decision was based on maintaining honor and avoiding shame. There were no individual rights, but instead order was maintained by bestowing honor when you did the expected things and bestowing shame when you did not. Now, obviously, people loved each other in this time, but love was conditional. In every situation, the laws superseded love. And if you chose to make a decision based on love rather than the cultural expectation, you would bring shame on yourself and your family. In some cases, exile or even death. Honor was given only when you demonstrated obedience. Love never won. Jesus knew this. But he also knew that the way of God was not about obedience to a set of rules or belief in a system. It was rather to choose to live the way of love, to make room for love to guide every decision, every choice. And ironically, it was his choice to be guided by love that got him executed. I am thinking that as fortunate as we may be to live in this culture today, we have lost the power of radical love. We take love for granted, and we can't imagine being arrested, let alone executed, for love. It seems to me that it has also made us resistant to facing the pain and suffering in our lives and in our world. We would much rather come here Palm Sunday or Easter Sunday than Good Friday. We feel compelled to get over our grief and to medicate our pain because we are not comfortable to appear publicly as anything other than happy and content. Peter Rollins made this remark partway through his lecture last weekend. And he was talking about the importance of facing our own ghosts, of facing our pain and our suffering, of facing our losses and our hurts and our disappointments, which are so much a part of life. And he stopped and he said, "You're probably thinking that what I'm telling you will make you depressed, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm telling you, you are already depressed and just don't know it." It is interesting to me that the most profound reaction that I have had since in my 5 years here, I witnessed on a Sunday morning here last December. It was my reflection on joy in the midst of grief and sorrow following my sister's death. So many of you were touched, not simply because I shared my pain and grief, but more significantly, because it touched your pain and grief. For it is only through great suffering that we can truly experience great love. It is only through recognizing that we are all suffering that we can love each other. This is facing the shadow in our time. This is not about wallowing in remorse and self-pity, but is rather about holding our joy and our pain, our love and our fear together in the tension that is our life journey. This is what it is to live in the very heart of God. Why, and I'm including myself in this, why do we so often apologize when we cry in public? Why do we so often, when asked how we are doing, reply, fine, or I'm okay. Jesus could have avoided Jerusalem. He could have moved back to Nazareth and lived happily ever after. He could have said no to love. Or could he? No. Jesus understood that living that way, living with a little bit of love and a whole lot of fear, was real death. Real death. It was choosing to live with love in the midst of the joy and the pain, the celebration and the suffering of life that gave him a taste of real life, abundant life. My life, your life, and the life of the world will never be perfect. That is the way of the universe. To find contentment, we need to be able to live fully into every single part of our lives, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We need to learn to cry together as easily as we laugh together. As we enter Holy Week, I urge you to consider participating in more than worship next Easter Sunday. Come on Maundy, Thursday, when we will share stories both of joyful and sad times together. Or come on Good Friday to experience the reality of suffering and sorrow that is part of every single life. Come and walk the way of love that Jesus walked. For the resurrection promise, that promise that we yearn for and long for and wait for every Easter, the promise of new and abundant life, can only be realized by facing the shadow.